Introductions and conclusions are sometimes challenging to write. How should I start? What should I say? And how should I end? This presentation will help answer these questions so you can have the best paper possible. The introduction is like a roadmap of your paper. It tells the reader what to expect, so your introduction should give a clear idea of what your topic and thesis are, as well as your tone. A strong introduction helps make sure that your readers don't get lost or confused while they read your paper. The length of your introduction should reflect the length of your paper and should grab the reader's attention. A 2 or 3 page essay will probably have a 1-paragraph introduction, whereas a 20 or 30 page paper will have a much longer introduction. Some good ways to grab the reader's attention are sharing relevant background information, sharing an interesting fact or statistic, or using an analogy or comparison, or even using a powerful short quotation, or sharing a story or scene that helps highlight your paper's subject. Let's look at a few sample introductory topic sentences. Let's say you're writing a paper about Hostess, which shut down in November of 2012 after a week-long labor strike. We could start by describing the company and what it did. Hostess made some of America's favorite snack foods, from Twinkies to Ding Dongs, for over 80 years. However, in November of 2012, the company announced it was shutting down after a week-long labor strike. So that's one example. Or you could start with an interesting fact, such as, Hostess has declared bankruptcy for the 2nd time this decade. Or you could even start with a more casual story-like sentence, such as, I'm starting to think the $500 Twinkie I bought this weekend might have been a bit premature. Notice how all 3 of these examples introduce the topic and define the tone of the paper? Whichever approach you take, make sure it's interesting and tells readers everything they need to know in order to understand the rest of your paper. Murderer! A man shouted. God help patients who get you for a nurse. What gives you the right to play God? Another one asked. It was the Phil Deneau show, where our guest is a fatted calf and the audience a 200-strong flock of vultures hungering to pick up the bones. I had told them about Mac, one of my favorite cancer patients. We resuscitated him 52 times in just 1 month. I refused to resuscitate him again. I simply sat there and held his hand while he died. This sample introduction is taken from the essay A Crime of Compassion by Barbara Huttman. In the essay, she argues that, as a nurse, she believes patients who will certainly die should be allowed the right to not be resuscitated. She hooks the reader by telling a story about a time when she was accused of being a murderer on a talk show. By beginning with this interesting scene, the author hooks us as readers because we want to know what this means and how it will turn out. Your introduction should establish the purpose and significance of your paper. In other words, it should explain why you are writing about your topic and why your topic is important. Your introduction should make your main points clear. And finally, your thesis statement will usually come at the end of your introduction. If you're having trouble writing a good introduction, you might try writing the introduction last. Many writers find it easier to write the introduction after they've written the rest of the paper, or at least large portions of it. Avoid using cliches like, in today's society, which is a broad generalization, or things like, since the beginning of history, or even stating the obvious like, crime has always been a part of society. Keep in mind that your introduction should reflect the kind of paper you're writing and will depend on the assignment, topic, and audience. Whatever you do, make sure the introduction is appropriate for the kind of paper you're writing. Just as important as how you start is how you end. While an introduction will establish your topic and tone, a conclusion should wrap up your topic and everything you've said. A conclusion is more than summarizing your paper and restating your thesis. It should remind readers what they've read and why it is important. It can also make a judgment on the topic or express approval of one side of an argument. A conclusion, however, should not introduce new information or bring up new issues. The length of your conclusion, like the introduction, should reflect the length of the paper. It needs to explain the overall significance of your paper and remind the reader why this topic matters, as well as give the paper a sense of completion. It should reinforce how your ideas fit together. There are a few different ways to write a conclusion. A conclusion can tie back to the introduction by adding to or referencing the interesting story, fact, or humoring tone you used at the beginning. It can even have a statement of significance that ties your thesis to larger issues. It can propose a solution to a problem or call for further research. Also, your conclusion could end with speculation when you don't have enough information to make a clear decision or suggestion. Let's look at a few example conclusion sentences about our hostess paper from before. We could refer to points we made in the introduction by saying something like, despite its 82 years in business, Hostess was unable to adapt to the changing demands of consumers. Dwindling revenue, rising costs, and poor relationships with labor unions ultimately led to Hostess's demise. Or, if we wish to make a recommendation, we could say, businesses should learn from Hostess's management mistakes to avoid going out of business as well. But whatever the case, the conclusion should wrap up the paper and reflect your tone and purpose. When writing your conclusion, avoid being over-emotional, melodramatic, or preachy. Keep a professional tone and keep emotions in perspective. Don't introduce new information or ask questions that raise new issues. These things should have been discussed in the body of your paper. Avoid mirroring your introduction or just restating what you've said. And finally, avoid using closing transitions like, in conclusion. The reader can see the end is coming, so it doesn't really need to be said. Introductions and conclusions might seem intimidating at first, but by following this advice, you'll be well on your way to starting and ending every paper with a bang.